spent quite a bit of time on YouTube, so I've run into this a few times. The lo-fi hip-hop radio stream that encourages people to study or relax to the music. These sorts of streams happen for other genres too. Particularly of interest are these. Classical music being taken out of the concert hall and put into the comfort of your own home. It seems a bit wrong, but is it? Hello and welcome to Music WSS. I am Walt Sedman, and today we will be exploring classical music's life outside of the concert hall. I've heard of classical music being used to study music for a while, but having it marketed to that purpose caught my attention. It seems strange that works meant to be the center of attention for an hour could be relegated to background music. But as I thought about it more, I realized that classical music has been used in casual spaces for about as long as the music has existed. So for this video, we'll be exploring what these casual spaces were and what music was played. So, what sort of spaces would classical music have been played in if not the concert hall? They can be divided into the private and the semi-private. The private would be in homes and normally just for personal entertainment. There's generally very little record of these sorts of performances because they were seen as a part of everyday life. There are occasional diary entries, but most people don't write about things they find normal. Thus, some of the only records we have for this type of performance are about printing and sales of sheet music. Because sheet music was the only way for works to circulate before recordings, the numbers are comparable to modern song sales. We don't have an equivalent to modern streaming statistics though, as there is no way to know how often a piece was played after purchase. This sort of private performance was also most comparable to the music radio streams that inspired this video. Semi-private spaces have more records to work with. These types of performances often fit into the salon cultures of the late 18th and 19th centuries. A salon was a social gathering that frequently featured music and were generally held by the upper class people in an area. Salons varied in nature, but were an acknowledged and catered to part of musical culture in their time. Many composers specialized in so-called salon genres, and many virtuoso musicians performed to entertain, form connections, and gain prestige. Some salons took on themes such as Schubertiads, which would have exclusively music by Franz Schubert. And of course, there were the salons with above-average music, the sort where anyone in the city would hope to be invited. Fanny Hensel held one such salon, as the older sister of romantic composer Felix Mendelssohn, a composer of salon genres, and a piano virtuoso on par with the best of her time, and reportedly better than her brother. It makes sense that Hensel organized one of the most musically notable salons. In some ways, Hensel's salons were closer to a private concert series than a group of friends entertaining each other. Before addressing the music common to casual spaces, I want to address an important difference between public and private performances. It was seen as improper for women to perform music in public. There were some exceptions, such as being a child prodigy, but as soon as that child grew up, she was expected to stop performing. Hensel's salons were as close to a public professional stage as she could get in her adult life. A more equal world would have seen her performing the same way Liszt and many other virtuosos did, and would have seen her receive all the compositional training her brother did. The educations of Fanny and Felix were equivalent, to a point. Felix had compositional training for the orchestra and learned some orchestral instruments. In polite society, women were expected not to compose for large ensembles. They could compose for piano and voice without too much difficulty, but publishing their music was a whole other can of worms. The other big restriction on women's music was in instruments. Piano and voice were seen as proper options, and everything else was somewhere between frowned upon and completely forbidden. Tangenting off of my tangent, you may hear people talk about how women did not compose for the orchestra in the 19th century. In the 19th and 20th centuries, some even thought they couldn't. They could. And some did, such as Augusta Holmes, who did compose a handful of orchestral pieces. There were women that were able to have professional careers in the 19th century. But these were the exceptions, the best of their time. My point is that societal norms prevented many women from being musical outside of private spaces. If casual classical music is disregarded, then so is a massive amount of women's musical involvement in the 19th century. Returning from my tangents, what sort of music was played? Like the spaces, it can be mostly divided into two parts: piano music, including piano and voice, and chamber music, particularly the string quartet. Many of the salon genres were for the piano, such as the nocturne or the fantasia. Also the Lied, which is German for song, and was the prominent genre for voice and piano. Schubert wrote over 600 Lieder, giving you an idea of how supported these genres were. Because recordings didn't exist yet, most larger works were known through piano transcriptions, such as Liszt's transcriptions of Beethoven's symphonies. The piano held a place of prominence in the 19th century. It was the standard instrument to learn, like guitar in modern day. Piano was also the first instrument of many composers, which left them inclined to compose for it as their abilities grew. The sheer range of the instrument made it highly versatile as well, with most modern pianos having just over 8 octaves. Most piano works were for 1 or 2 performers, so chamber music was a way to allow for more participants. The string quartet was a favorite genre of late 18th century composers, especially Haydn and Mozart. Its prominence decreased in the 19th century, in part due to the many innovations in wind instrument and piano construction, creating new sounds and potential for compositions, while string instruments were relatively unchanged. The ensemble did remain a favorite for casual spaces, though. Many of the piano transcriptions I mentioned were also transcribed for string quartet. Publishers would often make as many transcriptions and arrangements of a piece as possible in order to maximize their profits. Marie Sumner-Lott offers an in-depth look at some of these works by examining the records of a Berlin-based publisher. Transcriptions could travel much faster than operas, so they were often the first exposure a population had to that opera. Sumner-Lott focused particularly on how French and Italian operas would be converted into string quartets, and their international elements and potentially fantastical themes were made appropriate for the home. Many of the arrangements adapted just popular thematic material rather than transcribing the entire opera. Sumner-Lott also highlights that many of these arrangements were not trying to teach the opera they adapted, but offer a taste of it. After a production has left town, you can still gather up a few friends and play the quartet, and until the music could be recorded, that had to do. This sort of music making came to an end due to the technological development that made the eventual radio streams possible: recording. Until music could be recorded, the only way to hear it was to play it yourself. Many people learned how to play instruments at least a basic level for entertainment. When music had to be live, it meant it had to be social. That sociality could be on small scales, but much like it takes 2 to tango, it takes 4 to quartet. Recordings didn't end casual classical though, they just changed it. The late 1940s saw the creation of the long-playing record, or LP, as a format designed with classical music in mind. Its 22 minutes per side were intended to be long enough for sizable movements from the orchestral canon. These records enabled something slightly different to rise to prominence though. A Baroque revival referred to as Baroque focused on Baroque concerti like Vivaldi's Four Seasons. LPs allowed for long listening sessions to this type of music, which was not possible prior to this. For reference, radios didn't start airing classical music for extended periods of time until the 80s after deregulation. Due to the similarities in much of the music, the listening experience was considered repetitive even as records were changed. Robert Fink discusses this aspect of Baroque to consider its possible role as a precursor to minimalism, a genre highly based on repetition. Some records marketed themselves to be part of the easy listening or casual classical trend, such as the 1958 album Music for Relaxation by the Melocrino Strings. The jacket for the album specifically referred to playing it over and over again. There were some issues with this instance of casual classical music. The standard listening practice was opposite of the intended listening practice for these records. One record requested to be listened to at high volumes to allow space for dynamic contrast, but the standard was to play these records quietly. There were some other issues as well, which I'll loop back to in a moment. So if there are good historical examples of casual classical music, why did the radio streams seem so strange to me? I think it comes down to how classical music wants to be perceived. Much of the music intended for casual classical is not the music thought of when saying classical music, or at least it's not the music that's supposed to be thought of. You're supposed to think of symphonies and opera, 2 massive, highly public genres that were major parts of high culture in their prime. Not the piano reductions and string quartet versions of those works that would have been far better known. Also, many classical musicians, musicologists, and critics find classical music too important to be background music. Baroque, the term that I've been using for the last bit of the video, was coined by musicologists to disparage the music and easy listening practices associated with it. Rejections of classical music as background music come from concerns of classical music losing its status and accelerating its decline from a place of cultural significance. The thing is, by now, that decline has happened, not because casual listening cheapened it, but because it failed to stay relevant. Classical music in casual spaces in the past has allowed the music to connect to far more people than it can reach in concert halls. These sorts of connections will keep classical music a part of modern culture, certainly a different part of culture than it used to be, but the world is very different from when the music was composed. So, to answer the question I opened the video with, are classical radio streams wrong? No, I don't think so. They're building off of older ways of listening to this music. They are making it a part of modern culture, and they're doing it more accessibly than possible in past formats of casual classical. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video, or at least feel empowered to tell off any classical music purists who are judging your listening habits. If you would like to share your thoughts about any of this, please do so in the comments. Thank you for watching.